Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a beautiful Wednesday morning, a brand new day in all of our lives. Hey, Janet Smith, it's great to have you on the show today. There in the chat room. That's a great way to start the show. Yeah, wow, it's been quite a week here in the United States. Hey, Lily, it's good to see you in the chat room. And over the course of the past, oh my goodness, several days, I think I've lost track, people connecting with me, asking the question, how do I find sacred amidst all of this chaos? And what is sacred? And is the chaos sacred? Is what is happening, is it sacred? What's going on? How do I hold the light? And so I thought all of us could get together this morning and chat about that. Is this sacred, this time? How do we find the sacred in what's going on? I live about literally 20 minutes from Grand Rapids, where, the city was on fire the other night, and police cars were burned and businesses were looted, and a lot of destruction happened. And at the same time, the next day, an incredible scene of beauty was had that people descended upon Grand Rapids, Michigan to clean up the aftermath of the rioting, the peaceful protest that was interceded by opportunists. Right? There's a big difference between rioting and protesting and looting. Looters are opportunists, and protesting is not rioting. So what started out as something very beautiful and peaceful and making a positive statement ended up into descending into something that was quite ugly, because it had been infiltrated by the darkness, infiltrated by opportunists. So, hey, Tara. Hey, Donna. And Tara, you live right there in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Not right in the downtown area itself, but right there on the outskirts. And for those of us even 20 minutes away, we could feel the energy on Saturday as things were beginning to stir up and brew up, and feel the winds coming in, right? The winds of something. Can feel it. So, yeah, interesting time. Hey, Donna. So how can we find the sacred, and is what is going on sacred? There's an old African teaching that says this too is God. This too is God. And so maybe we're being given an opportunity to do something different. I was listening to Barack Obama the other day, and, he talked about taking this time to look within our own selves and around our own dinner table and within our own homes to really take a look at our own, perhaps, prejudices about people, situations, groups of people, to see where it's played out in all of our lives, and maybe, taking care of the home front first. And I do believe that a lot of times the chaos begins at the dinner table when it's not confronted or when it's not dealt with, right? How do you feel about that? Good morning. I think a lot of people go out and protest, and they put their boots to the ground outside of their own home, but when it comes to their own home, perhaps we still allow the flow of ignorance, of racism or injustice, or, we allow it. We don't want to rock the boat at our own dinner table, but I say, rock the boat at the dinner table. And if you lose a few occupants at the dinner table going forward, well, okay. What do we allow in our own homes? What do we allow for discussion? And discussion is a good thing. Having differing points of view is a wonderful thing. And being able to converse about it and chat about it, I love that. That's how we grow and how we learn. But hatred, that's another subject altogether, hatred and ignorance. And sometimes ignorance, can become informed, right? We can all become informed in the places where we are ignorant. Where I can tell you in my lifetime, I've been informed about the places that I've been ignorant, right? And thank goodness I have. And allow it. And I continue to do that. So, hey, Angie, how do you feel about that, everybody? Where are you finding sacred in the chaos? For me, I'm finding sacred in the photos of people coming together, laying down arms, hugging, having dialogue, conversation rather than screaming and yelling at one another, breaking it down to really talking and asking questions, sometimes the hard questions, and digging within our own selves to ask our own hard questions about maybe the way that we feel about some things, or maybe the way we were taught about some things. And maybe we've come here to do something different, to break a generational pattern, to break a generational trauma and begin again. At least I think so for my own part, in my own world. For me, finding sacred is still doing the work that we're doing in our own communities, while at the same time holding the light. My friend Linda Griezak has always said, just hold the light, sister, just hold the light. Hold that light. Even when you're out doing what it is that you do, we have to hold the light. What does that mean? Hold the light. Hold the love. Hold the hope. Hold the wattage for change, peaceful change. I think so. I think so, and it's not always easy to do that. You know, at Gathering Thunder, we've just been busy. We are busy. Right, Lily? Right, Tara? So as the chaos is going around, we're still doing what I think is sacred work. We can do sacred work in our own homes. We can do sacred work in our prayer time, our contemplation time. We can still work on behalf of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited people. We can still feed elders and youth and their four-legged pets. We can still help with the wild horse sanctuary. Life continues to go on doing the sacred work and at the same time holding the light, holding the hope. Embodying it, I think, is what I'm saying, maybe. Embodying it. Good morning, Delgadillo. Embodying that. You know, having the rubber meet the road. The rubber meeting the road. And sometimes the rubber doesn't literally meet the road, I don't think. Sometimes I think the rubber meets the metaphorical road. It's when we're in our homes, sequestered in prayer, in contemplation, doing our own healing work. In other words, our own balancing, doing our own work. It's a big one, because when we do work for ourselves, you know, we get ourselves back into balance and wellness, then we're also helping 7 generations before us and 7 generations behind us. That's still going on. Doing all of that's exhausting, isn't it? Holy buckets, it can be exhausting. And you think, what did I do anyway? Right? Holding the light, sharing that light, embodying the light, doing the work. Keep on keeping on. Linda always says that's not for ninnies. It isn't. It isn't. So sometimes, yeah, rubber meets the road and the boots hit the ground. And I've really been struck these past many days. And this morning I was having a really great conversation with my friend Tony here in Grand Rapids, who lives, you know, right downtown in Grand Rapids, where all of the chaos began Saturday evening. He's right there in that portion of the city. And he and I have been having a great conversation for the past hour about a whole lot of things. He's a Native American man. And we talked about spirit, and we talked about what chaos creates in the realms of spirit and the wattage that can be created out of love or hatred or opportunists, right? How are we using our energy? What is that? What is it that we're putting forth in the world? So sometimes, yeah, we're called to have the rubber meet the road. And I was talking to Tony about my brother, Guy Dullknife. You know, he was the chieftain at Ocheti Shakowi, also known as Standing Rock, right? He was the chieftain of that camp up there. And I think probably one of the greatest teachings I've ever received in my life was from my brother Guy. Every morning when he and I would sit around that sacred fire and we would watch Ampowi Chapkiwi, Morning Star Woman, some people call her Venus, rising up in the eastern sky. We would be having a really hot cup of coffee together and sitting around the fire. And we could see the lights going on, right? The pipeline workers, the lights would start, or maybe they didn't go off all night. They were, raining down on the camp all night. But we would talk about the beginning of a new day, and that every day gives us an opportunity to do something different or to hold the course, right? To do something different or to hold the course. But I think the greatest teaching that Guy gave me at one time there were 10,000 people up there at Standing Rock. And every day while I was up there, I would go with him to the meeting tent. And he would have me sit next to him. And Johnny would come in, and people would come in with their concerns. It was a big old army tent, And Guy would invite people to come in and talk to him and share their ideas about what was going on in the camp, or what was going on between the pipeline workers and those who were there holding the light, right? And just dialogue, opening up to conversation, to new ideas. And every day in the morning, after the morning prayers, he usually sang the prayers, and then he would speak the prayers, and then he would hand the microphone over to me, and he'd say, "Sis, tell them what's on your mind. Tell them what's on your heart this morning, sis. Do that." And he would sit down, and I would just say, whatever I would share, whatever was on my heart and mind that morning. And then everyone would sing. We'd sing and hold sacred space. Hundreds of people around that sacred fire, people from all over the world holding hands. And when that was done, that bit of the morning, the coffee and the rising of Morning Star Woman and the gathering of people around the sacred fire and the singing, Guy always ended the prayer circle every morning with these words: love one another. Be good to one another. If you see someone struggling, help them. If you meet someone who doesn't speak your language, help them in a way that you can both understand. There are people from around Grandmother Earth here at Standing Rock, here at Oceti Sakowin. Be good to one another, love one another. And those men over there, those police officers and those pipeline workers, remember they have families too. Remember, they're human beings too. Now go out there and be good to one another. And then we would all have our morning water ceremony, walking down to the Cannonball River, singing, having ceremony. And I've really been struck by that juxtaposition after watching the Bedlam, right here in Grand Rapids. I worked for the Grand Rapids Press, the newspaper, for 33 years. And for much longer than that, it's been ensconced in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is Native American territory. Of course, it all is. The land of the Anishinaabe, the people of this land. And one of the buildings that was damaged is a Native-owned building. The McKay Tower became Native-owned just this year. And within months of becoming a Native-owned, beautiful old building, gorgeous old building in Grand Rapids. It's a pillar, right? It was damaged, pillaged. There's a lot of symbolism in that, right? Even in this modern day. And all the while, I said to Tony, all I can think about is Guy. Love one another, be good to one another. And even the day that we all marched, many of us marched from Standing Rock to the courthouse, to the police station there in town. It was quite a long walk. There were people from all over the world walking with us, and we surrounded the courthouse, holding hands. And we sang sacred songs. And there were police, of course there were. Of course there were. And I remember one police officer in particular, rather large, imposing gentleman. And we were singing songs, and there was a sacred pipe. And I remember looking over at that police officer at one point, and I could see the tears dripping down his chin and onto his chest. And I remember what Guy said. Remember, police officers have families too. They're people too. And not all of them are bad. Not all human beings are bad human beings. The majority of human beings are beautiful people with families, with hopes and dreams and desires. Be good to them. Love one another when you go out on that walk today. Do it with love. And that's how we left, boots to the ground. And then fast forward to the march in Grand Rapids, a year and a half ago. There I was marching with Tony. Minnie Wichoni, water is life. It was a peaceful march. There was even some laughter in that march. Right? There was some laughter in that march. But the point was made. One time I said to Guy after Standing Rock, when I was at his place there in Potato Creek on Pine Ridge, sometime after Standing Rock, and he said, you know, sis, they built that pipeline anyway. They built it anyway. I said, they did build it anyway, but you want to know something, Tiblo? That means my older brother in the Lakota language. I said, but you want to know something, Tiblo? Everybody there at Standing Rock quietly started a worldwide movement on behalf of Grandmother Earth and the Spirit of Water. Started something that changed the world in a peaceful way, in a good way. I was there the day that my nephews came back to our little camp. They had been all shot up with rubber bullets. Oh my goodness, the welts on their backs that we had to put medicines on. I was there that day. And that evening we prayed. That evening we prayed about it. And in that, there was a movement that broke loose, right? So there was a lot of sacred about that as well. And so finding the sacred is where we find it, I believe. It's where we see it. Lily is saying so right about having those difficult conversations on the home front, even if there are different multi-generational viewpoints. But the important thing is that the conversation happens. Yes. Thank you for that, Lilian. That's right. Having those conversations. Tara saying, true, for the most part, racism is learned from family or society. Yeah. Oh my goodness, growing up in the household I grew up in, if I ever were to say something racist or derogatory about anybody, there would have been swift punishment. And I remember when I was, in second grade, third grade, I remember a woman, an African-American woman, who lived in the Army housing, literally next door to us on base housing. And I remember her chasing my mother down the sidewalk with a knife, calling her everything in the book because my mother had white skin. And I remember that. I remember the military police coming. You know, we had to call the military police because this woman was literally running my mother down the sidewalk to kill her. And I remember, my dad coming home and talking to the military police, and Dad didn't press charges. And I remember the Sarge saying, we don't know what her whole story is, honey. There's a story there, and what she did isn't right, but there's a story. Something happened somewhere, right? And your mother's okay. But that was traumatic to watch. It was traumatic to watch. So yeah, we all have experiences. And sometimes having those conversations at the dinner table, what is or isn't acceptable, it's not easy to do that. And especially for those of us of the fairer complexion, right? I'm multiracial. My skin is very fair, and some people mistake that. I think a lot of us are multiracial anymore. But having those conversations, even with ourselves, boy, where could I have done better? Where can I still do better? Sometimes having conversations with people at the school, sometimes that come to the school, we have great conversations, but that's conversations with people who kind of sort of think like we do. But what about the people who don't? Well, sometimes we can't necessarily speak up right in that moment, but our behavior and the way that we act in this world speaks volumes. I believe anyway. Lily says, our conversation was voicing our frustrations and different viewpoints on how to show support. Yeah, boy, that's tough, isn't it? It is. And maintaining the love, holding the light. And I think, light probably is that love. Holding that wattage of light, love. Having those conversations isn't always easy, right? Because sometimes our humanness just wants to slap the stupid out of some people, or what we perceive to be stupid. Yeah. How do we support? Sometimes we support from home and we pray for everybody. We invoke the light. We ask for the light to overlight whatever is going on. Sometimes we're called to do deeper spiritual work. Fire up that chanupa and pray with it. Yeah. Lily says, yes, and I agree with looking within too. Yeah, boy, sometimes. Yeah. I remember the very first time I ever got into a fight, a fist fight. It was at the bus stop, and it was with Mrs. Gray's younger daughter, Janet. I wonder if Mrs. Gray is still alive. Her husband, he was a beautiful human being. Anyway, there I was, like in third grade or fourth, it would be third grade, standing there in the bus line, and she just walked up and popped me right in the chops. I mean, wow. And I was only in third grade and kind of a scrapper, for a third grader. Oh my goodness. And I remember popping her in the chops right back. And I don't even know what that was all about, but I think it was an extension of what had happened a few days prior to that between her mother and mine, right? Oh my goodness. And then we looked at each other. Oh, there we were. She landed a pretty good one there, right on the old nose. Hurt like heck. Of course, I had to return it because when you're in third grade, you're just defending yourself at that point. And then it stopped. And we just kind of looked at each other like, well, that was silly. That was really silly. Yeah. And the irony is, next thing we knew, we were playing, with one another in the backyard. I don't think we ever talked again about why she walked up and hit me in the nose, and why I hit her back in the nose. I don't think I've ever shared that story, but here we are, right? And then the next thing you know, we were in the backyard playing that afternoon after school. Yeah. And again, there's my dad saying, honey, you look like you got punched in the face. Well, yeah, Dad, I did, actually. Did you start the fight or did somebody else start that fight, Denise Lynn? Well, Janet started the fight. And did you hit her back? Yep, I hit her back. Well, how parents react to that whole thing. Yeah, I punched her back, Dad. Oh dear. All right, well, let me go talk to Mr. Gray. So Dad went over and talked to Sergeant Gray. So here's Sergeant Kronk and Sergeant Gray talking about their two daughters that just duked it out at the bus stop. And again, like I said, pretty soon we were out in the backyard playing, and we never talked about it again. I've been thinking about that too lately. I'm thinking about the fact that I am grateful that I was raised in a household that if I said anything derogatory about anybody, there was not room for that. There was no room to be derogatory about color, sexual preference, none of it. I was pretty progressive, being raised by a couple of parents from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And give them their props for that. And I've tried to carry that on myself. Yeah. So what do I do for myself every day? How do we hold the light? Well, my kids have been barraging me with, Mom, what do you think about this? What is going on? And having conversations with them about some things. How do they feel about it? What's the, Mom, these rioters. I said, but honey, they're not rioters. There's a difference between a protester, a rioter, and a looter. There's a difference. I mean, there are riots in the United States after the World Series, right? The team can win the Super Bowl or a World Series, and riots break out. Cars are burned, and then the opportunists known as looters show up. Protest is different. Martin Luther King, right? One of the greatest protesters of all time. Rosa Parks, right? The list goes on and on. Guy Dullknife. So, how do we hold the light for that? Well, for me, I grew up in a house where people are people and everybody has an experience in their life. And we don't have to carry those experiences on in our life. We can take a look at it much more deeply. Have some real hard conversations with ourselves, with our ancestors. I'm really big into ancestry. I know you know that, right? So I've got European ancestors, I've got African ancestors, and right now they're kind of having some dialogue within my own blood and bones, right? Speaking up within me. And those of you that, you come from various mixed lineages, you know what I mean when you've got all these dialogues going on within your blood and your bones. But what about, but what about, but what about, but what about? Yeah, what about that? Goes on back and forth, back and forth. Well, so I do a lot of prayer every day. Thank you, Creator, for helping us all through this time. If it's happening outside of us, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, around the world, it's happening within us. Man, I was looking at photos of Paris, right? So here we are in the United States, and people in the UK, Europe, all over the world, they're being impacted in the Middle East. Why? Because it's stirring up something within their own selves for consideration. Not for blame. I don't think it's for blame, but for consideration. I loved it when I saw George Floyd's brother say, we're a peaceful family. We're a prayerful family. Stop it. Stop this in the name of my brother. We're a prayerful family, a peaceful family. Boy, those are potent words. And a lot of times, when we're asked to consider some things within ourselves, that's when we start pointing fingers, isn't it? That's when we start pointing fingers and lashing out. Sometimes it's way easier, it seems, to lash out and point fingers than it is to take a look on the inside of the interior castle and say, Am I going to be the one to break a generational pattern of fill in the blank? Well, here's an opportunity to do so. If in your family, in your bloodline, there are generations of racism, and I believe every race is capable of racism, right? Human beings, let's just put it that way, human beings are capable of being racist, of being mean, of being hateful. Human beings are also capable of being compassionate and loving and kind and extraordinary. If we're being called, and you know if you are, I know if I am, if we are being called to break a generational pattern of anything that is less than loving and kind and humane and compassionate and extraordinary, then do that, beginning with yourself. That's how we can find some sacred in the chaos. It's not going to make you popular. For some people, it's not going to make you popular, I'll tell you that. So if you're wanting to know how you can rise up and be center stage and be popular with everybody, breaking generational patterns, you're not going to. You're just not. Do it anyway. Life is short. And you may be your own next ancestor next time around. So if you do the work right now, next time you come back around in another lifetime, you'll be glad you did it in this lifetime, helping to break those generational patterns of being mean or... Boy, there's a whole lot of things we get to be when we're human, right? I think I've come here to break some generational patterns. Well, I know I have. What am I talking about? I'm working on it. It's a process. Lord, help me to be a better woman today. Help me to be a better person today. Help me to be a kind, good, loving person today, ancestors. Bring your gifts through me, not your hatred. Bring your love through me. Whatever hatred you had in your lifetimes, don't bring that through me. Bring your love through me. Bring your gifts through me. Bring that through me. Creator, let me see with your eyes. Creator within, let me see through those eyes and speak through that mouth. Not always easy. We catch ourselves, don't we? Or is it just me? Sometimes I catch myself thinking a variety of things. I look at those looters and I think, oh my God. I don't know what the backstory is. And maybe they're there to help us look within. I don't know. All I know is I can be responsible for myself and my conversations with my children and my grandson and my brothers and my sisters and my relatives. All I can be is responsible for me and the way I conduct myself. Yesterday I was teaching a class, Kimberly Wink, if you're on, thank you for this. And sometimes when we have those conversations at the dinner table, some people are just going to get up and leave the dinner table. And that's okay. I've had that happen. I've had it happen in classes that I teach, right? And that's okay, but not in my house. Not in my house. Not in my classroom. Not in my house. Don't bring your dirty shoes through my house. Not here. Hey, Sonia. And it's not easy sometimes when people pick up and they leave. And you think to yourself, did I do the right thing by doing what I think was the right thing? And sometimes the great thing is that conversation then can happen. I got up and I left in a huff because you're not willing to talk about whatever. But I'm back, so let's talk about why you feel the way that you do. Boy, me and my son Dane, we have some great conversations because politically, he and I are very different. Very different. And we talk about it. I don't agree with his viewpoint, and that's okay. We can agree to disagree, right? And still be good to one another. We can still love each other, even if we agree to disagree. I've agreed to disagree with more than one person in my life, and I know how they feel about it, a certain thing, a certain thought, a certain idea, as long as it doesn't involve hatred. I don't want hateful people in my life. No, not in my house. And when I say not in my house, I literally mean not in my house and not in the enchanted forest and not in my house of my soul or my heart. I will not have that hatred. Mm-mm. No. Ain't happening. I can have disagreements on philosophy. Okay. Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, whatever that is. Yeah, that's what makes the world a cool place. But not hatred. Not hatred. And, we do have to consider, I read something somewhere about, why it is that we in the United States, well, really probably around the world, we glorify our warriors. And I come from a long line of warriors. Oh my goodness. Back to the American Revolution. I have grandfathers who fought in the American Revolution. Oh my goodness, the French and Indian Wars, the Civil War. My grandfathers were Confederate soldiers. Korea, Vietnam, First World War, Second World War. But one of the things, at least at least with the Sarge and with Guy, both Vietnam veterans, they came to really define that word warrior. And so here in the Native American culture, warrior has a different connotation perhaps than in other places because it means the person who takes care of the community, who cries for the community. It's not machismo, it's not bravado, it's something far larger than that. And I think for a lot of war veterans, they come back with a new sense of compassion because they're not the same people that they were when they went off to war. But I got thinking about that too. I thought about that too. And thought about the fact that, hey, I was supposed to go to the United States Air Force Academy. I wanted to fly F-14 jets. Ancestors decided they were going to make me only 5'2", so I didn't qualify back in 1981. Right? Ooh, what would my life have been like then? So I think really that the whole thought for the show this morning is that finding the sacred in the chaos means finding the sacred within yourself. Finding sacred space, holding the light. And not just outward around us, but within us. Are you taking it out on the road and out into the community, but you're not doing it in your own house? Time to do it in our own house, everybody. To sweep off that front porch. To get the dust bunnies under the bed. I mean, because, I travel the world. And this racism thing, this prejudice thing exists everywhere in every single country I have ever visited. It is not exclusive to the United States. It is not. Right? There's prejudice about religion, not having a particular religion, right? I remember one time, oh my goodness, where was I? Highlands of Scotland? I was somewhere anyway. And somebody looked at me and said, "You look like you're one of the dark Irish." It was up in the Highlands of Scotland. "You look like you're one of the dark Irish." And I looked at him. It was a docent at Stirling Castle. That's what it was. I wanted to go to where King James lived, right? Since in the church I grew up in, we used the King James version of the Bible. So I thought it'd be cool to go to King James' place there at Stirling Castle, Scotland. See who it was that edited the book or put his 2 cents into the book. But anyway, somebody looked at me and said, "You look like you're dark Irish." And I said, "What is dark Irish? What is that? Never heard of that term before." I thought, wow, I got some learning to do. But I thought, our looks really do matter, right? So immediately he had a thought in his head about who I was. He didn't say it in a way that was malicious. But even sometimes it's that subliminal. That's the only reason I bring it up. Sometimes it's that subliminal that it happens. And my son Dane, Janet's saying, "I was born not far from Stirling." It's beautiful. Oh my goodness, it's beautiful. I love the Highlands of Scotland, but then I come from Clan MacDonald. My roots are deep in Scotland. Clan MacDonald that soon became King, right? All of a sudden the last name became King in the UK and Ireland. Clan MacDonald. My son Dane, he gets asked all the time, or people assume all the time. I think we all do this in ways. That's what I'm talking about here. We look at one another and go, And based on whatever it is that we were taught or we grew up with or our experiences, we look at somebody and we go, and maybe we're making an assumption. You ever make an assumption about somebody? I have. As I get older, I'm learning to not do that, to not let my memories or the ancestral database inform me of what's going on right now. Lily saying, yes, that is true. And even colorism within each race. Oh my goodness, my Takojas, my grandchildren out on the reservations. Some of them are treated so poorly because they aren't dark enough. Oh my goodness, my beautiful granddaughter Isabella. She is a Lakota Wee, but she is very fair-skinned, right? Her grandmother was Caucasian. And she is She has been tormented over the years because she's not dark enough. Oh my goodness. You're right, colorism. And so sometimes it is subliminal, and sometimes, yeah, Lily, you were there at Stirling Castle. Oh my goodness. Todd and I are going to go back to Scotland next autumn. By golly, he's going to wear his Clan Somerville kilt. As humans, we do have clans, right? And we have tribes, and we have Teoshbayes, we have families, and right? And his kilt looks different than the Clan MacDonald kilt. I have a beautiful Isle of Skye wrap that I wear when I'm in Scotland. It looks different, and so right there's differences. And rather than, honor or learn, I think this may be where we're going. Talk to me about that part of you that's different than me. I want to learn from you. That's why I love to travel. My dad, he was a gypsy man. He loved to travel. My dad was also a volunteer, the Sarge. He did all that. He taught me that. Travel, ask questions, learn. If you don't understand, Denise Lynn, ask the question. There are enough ignorant people in the world. Don't be one. Right? That was the edict of my childhood. There are enough ignorant people in the world. Don't be one. If you don't understand or you don't know, ask, and ask nicely. You'll learn things that way. Sage advice. Of course, when you're young, you're like, okay, blah, blah. All right, I'll do that. I mean, it worked. I knew more about Buddhism at the age of 8 from my neighbor, Mrs. Gordon, from Korea than most 8-year-olds knew on that army base, I'm pretty sure, right? But that was great information. Ask. So why does that Clan Somerville kilt look like that? Whatever. I remember, up at the grandmothers, 13 indigenous grandmothers gathering in the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Lame Deer, Montana. And that was the time that Mr. Custer, General Custer, George Armstrong Custer, his great-grandniece showed up at the powwow grounds while the grandmothers were there. And Philip Whiteman, Barbara's first cousin, who's the chieftain, came into the powwow ground and said, there's somebody here, and we've checked her credentials, and she wants to say something. Now, mind you, Lame Deer is 30 miles from Little Bighorn, where, General Custer was killed. And, well, if you know your American history, you know what I'm talking about. So here we are 30 miles from the Crow Reservation and from Little Bighorn, and up walks this little petite woman who grabs the microphone, and my granddaughter Davian is sitting next to me. And there are people from all over the world in the powwow grounds. And this woman, I can't imagine the courage, introduced herself as the great-grandniece of George Armstrong Custer. And she had come to the powwow grounds on behalf of the Custer family to apologize for the atrocities committed against the Native American people by her great-uncle and the men of the 7th Cavalry of Michigan. You could have heard a pin drop. And then pretty soon you could hear wailing. You could hear silent tears. And then she said something so brave. I've come here to ask for forgiveness for my bloodline. I've come to apologize, and in order to make this work, I'm asking for forgiveness. And I will never forget this as long as I live. Looking over to my left in the powwow grounds, I watched a group of Navajo and Apache women stand up. And man, when they stood up, you could feel the energy of these women standing up. And they had their shawls over their arms, and they walked down from the stands into the powwow grounds, and they hugged this woman. And I said to Davian, never forget this moment. It's not going to be on CNN. It's not going to be on Fox. It's not going to be on MSNBC. But this moment needs to be on your heart and my heart forever as long as we live. And pretty soon, Grandma Rita Blumenstein from Alaska, she came into the powwow grounds and she said, everybody, this is time for an intertribal dance. And she was 95 years old or something at that time. And at one point in time, to my right, there were a group of Scottish elder women, and they stood up, and they were wearing their clan tartans. Oh, and they stood up, and just like those Apache and Navajo women, I could feel the energy of those Scottish grandmothers standing up. And Davy looked at me and she said, Grandma, how come they're wearing all of those colored patterns? I said, well, the same way that you wear your regalia, Davy, when you're dancing. That's their clan regalia. Oh, that's their tribal outfit. Yep. Oh, I said, and every one of those patterns represents a different clan. And they've come here together to be with these grandmothers and all these elders from around the world. Well, those Scottish grandmothers came down from the powwow stands and they entered into the intertribal dance. Woo! Let me just say, everybody, there was some energy going on in that intertribal dance with people from around the world. All begun with a woman from Cleveland, Ohio, who drove her Toyota car up to Lame Deer, Montana, to apologize on behalf of her ancestral bloodline, and then to ask for forgiveness. Priceless. And then a couple years later, I saw this stream on Facebook saying that never happened, blah, blah, blah. And I alerted Davian. Davian and I had the last word on that Facebook thread because we bore witness to what happened. And we held that in our hearts. And we spoke up about it. And that thread there on Facebook, all this quarreling and arguing going on about did it or didn't it happen, it stopped. It stopped. And I've been thinking about that woman too lately. And would I have the courage to do that? Whew. Yeah. Would I have the courage? I hope so. On Grandmother Earth, the way that you work your goodness and your ancestral love, keep doing that. Keep doing that thing. All right. Well, everybody, at 11 o'clock, we have Terry Ruel with Dear Miss T. So I've got to get off and get Terry on and get out there and shine your light as only you can shine it. Next up, it is Terry Ruel with Dear Miss T. Blessings be, everybody.